already the best news of the week has happened. Already. You know what it is? It's Friday, and you made it to Friday. Unless you're watching or listening later on, on your own time, and you're like, well, it's not Friday to me. Maybe listening to this on Sunday. That's the magic of digital media. Regardless, welcome here, my friends. Thanks for finding the Wicked Radio live stream and podcast. You know what didn't happen last night? Well, there were more riots from the same idiots, same radical idiots. I get that. They did have some new chants. I'll give them that. They creatively came up with some new chants because they're emboldened. But you know what did not happen yesterday and last night? Give me a second. A movement did not happen like they wanted it to. This is going, and you're thinking, but Bill, there's riots in the streets, and there's an autonomous zone in Minneapolis now, and Seattle and Portland. No. I'm telling you, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but I'm going to. Just like yesterday, I'm going to make the comparison to 2020. These are different times. This is not taking off like they wanted it to. We'll get into that, I promise you. As well as this. This is our main takeaway today. Isn't it amazing? The irony is thick with this one, my friends, how young, brave Iranians are fighting for freedom, with the balls it takes to do it in that country, while young, brainwashed Americans here are falling hook, line, and sinker for a radical, stupid ideology that is now getting them killed. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that something? And I'm telling you, this Iran story, and I was late to the game too, believe me. But if you're not paying attention to this, we're never going to see anything like this again in our lifetimes. I promise you, this is incredible. We may be, if you were like me, born in the 70s or 80s, you were lucky enough to witness the fall of the Berlin Wall and what's happening in Iran. It's that big. And again, it's like I'm not trying to preach to you. I was late to this game too, but it's unbelievable what's happening. Can you imagine if we had a free Iran that we were friends with? This is a different world that we didn't think would ever happen. Anyway, we'll get into that as well. But thanks for being here. I appreciate you. All right, let's get to it. Last night, the radicals, they were out in full force again. Same idiots, different cause, new chants. We'll get into that in a second. But, these were the same, let's see, Free Palestine people. These were the No Kings protesters. These were the pro-Maduro protesters. Same idiots, whatever. But we do have to go to New York City last night because this did reach a different level. And this is where you have to say, no, we're not putting up with this crap. This was it. Listen to what they're chanting. Okay, let's go over this for a second. Even though I'm holding to this movement is not taking off. I promise you, it's good news. Don't be a panicking. I promise you, it's good news. Okay, this is what I got to put a stop to, though. This is enough. Save a life, kill ICE. That was one of the chants. Kristi Noem will hang, and some others. That was one of the chants because they're emboldened. Because they have a communist mayor in New York City. They know no one's going to prosecute them. They're wearing their masks. So this is where we are now, and this is where the rest of America has said enough. This was it. This was the moment, okay? Now, like I said, same idiots, different protest, different rally, different riot, whatever the hell you want to call it. But this is why, first and foremost, this is why this movement is not taking off like they wanted it to. Let's go back to yesterday in Minneapolis with that story, right, with the shooting. Tried their absolute best. I did tell you that they were going to try their best to make this their new George Floyd moment. Tried their best. Say her name. You heard that throughout cities, throughout the country. Well, what happened? What was different? What's different now? Again, don't get mad at me. I'm comparing this again to 2020. What was different? Why didn't this take off? Well, almost immediately. Yesterday morning, multiple angles of the ICE officer shooting the lady that ran into him, brushed him with the car, came out where he was pushed, he was dragged a little bit, and in a split-second notice had to make a shooting. And now she's dead because she got brainwashed into supporting a radical movement. This is what's actually happening. All of it's sad, obviously, but multiple angles came out and were posted on X immediately, and then all the other social media channels, and people of common sense looked at this, maybe on their lunch hour, maybe at dinner, maybe just at work, maybe just on their own, and they said, they did this. They looked at their phone, they said, oh, well, yeah, I would have shot her. And immediately after that, probably released by DHS, the information. This was the same ICE officer 6 months ago was dragged 30 feet by another radical in a car. You think he might have been a little bit ready to defend himself in that situation again? Yeah. Yeah, I think so. What else happened? Well, the information is out there now, and that's the main thing. And people aren't putting up with this anymore. See, the difference was in 2020, you couldn't fight back at all. You didn't have all the information. You didn't have this free media now. You didn't have independent journalists pointing all this stuff out. You didn't have podcasters pointing this stuff out. And people aren't putting up with this anymore. Isn't that amazing? That's why I say this whole radical movement, this whole legion of idiots who have been sucked into this radical, idiotic ideology aren't falling for it, because now you see what the game is. That was different in 2020. It really was. Remember that? The riots of the summer of 2020 all kicked off with the George Floyd thing, but then it was a COVID thing, and then it was lockdown. It's just this whole nonsense, and nobody knew what was going on because the media completely twisted this. Remember? Mostly peaceful protests. Even today, if you talk to a lot of people who have their only information sources are those same mainstream outlets, you'll bring up the riots of the summer of 2020, and they'll go, what riots? That's the power of a completely corrupt media. But again, I leave you with great news. They don't have that power anymore because we have the information. That's why this movement isn't taking off. Here's another proof positive. What's the biggest media event? What's the biggest thing that will happen in mass media this weekend? It's the NFL playoffs. The NFL owns this time of the year. So let's go to the home cities for a second for all the wild card weekend playoff games. For first off, Saturday and then Sunday. Charlotte, Chicago, more on them in a second. Jacksonville, this nonsense isn't happening in Duval, trust me on this one. Philadelphia and New England, so that's Foxborough, Boston Metro. Maybe you'll have a public address announcer pointing out, or a moment of, and this would be a stretch, maybe a moment of silence for the rioter, for the social justice warrior that was killed in Minneapolis the other day. Maybe. But you know what you're not going to see? You're not going to see painted messages in the end zones. You're not going to see players kneeling for this. You're not going to see protests inside the stadium. That's not going to happen. Again, I know I'm a broken record. Compare that to 2020 with everything we saw. This movement isn't taking off, and you shouldn't let it panic you. But what do we do about it? None of this matters. I'm just spouting off an opinion unless we do something about it and take some action, right? First and foremost, you know what we have to do? And I'm, again, broken record. I always talk about this. It's time. Federally, masks have to be banned for gatherings of more than one person. 2 people, you can't mask up. I'm sorry, it's time. But it's the cold and flu season. Oh, bullshit. Enough of this. The reason why they're all masked up, like you saw in that clip in New York, is because they don't want to be identified. So that you can't walk past NYU this morning or get your coffee at Starbucks and say, hey, you were that person firebombing a car last night. That's why they do this. That's why the masks exist. Don't let them tell you anything different. Now we know that jig is up as well. So that's nonsense. But the most important thing of all of this is not to fall for this. And it's up to you, me, and everybody else to make sure that your loved ones don't get sucked into this idiotic ideology. Because there's the radical communists, and that's exactly what they are, often, as we talked about yesterday, with globalist money providing all this stuff with the same chants and the same signs and the same cities and the same people and all this bullshit. But all of this dies on the vine if young people push back on this crap. So it's up to you, me, and everybody else to make sure your loved ones, you don't have to preach to them. They'll turn a deaf ear to you. I get it. I got kids too. But you have to show them how nonsensical all this is. Make sure that they don't get sucked up into this radical ideology. Because that's how important this is. But I'm telling you, the good news is this isn't taking off. In fact, it's having the opposite effect. More common sense Americans are getting hold of this information and saying, no, that's just stupid. The hypocrisy is thick with these people. What kind of hypocrisy? Okay, the same people probably that you saw in the clip in New York for the No Kings protest. They were the same people who were marching in cities like New York and Chicago and Philly for Maduro. No kings, but terrorist narco dictators. We're okay with that. The hypocrisy is just so thick with these people. And now we see right through it. So that's the good news, and take that away. But the irony here is amazing. I said it in the introduction. Isn't it incredible? You have so many young people in America falling for this idiotic ideology, falling for it hook, line, and sinker. And yet look what's happening in Iran. Mostly young people with the guts to stand up to that regime. I'm telling you, I know this sounds like hyperbole, and I get it because I was late to this story too. But if you haven't paid attention to what's going on in Iran, it's one of the most unbelievable things of all time. I never thought we'd see anything more radical and they call it the geopolitical shift than the Berlin Wall falling, because that changed everything. But this, I don't think we're going to see anything like this again in our lifetime. Can you imagine a world where if Iran was free, and obviously we would try to be, a strong ally of them, Iran, with that superpower, with the money, nukes and oil and power that they have. And if this country became free again, at least according to their standards, compared to what they have now, it's unreal what's going on here. It's taken years in the making, but they're fighting back against this Islamist regime. Now, here's just a clip of this, and you can see this all over social media. But this guy now we don't understand him. He's Iranian. But apparently the translators are saying he's begging President Trump for his support as these cities are falling. Now, falling in a good way, though, because they're pushing back. Here just small little sample size.
Hi, Mr. Trump. Here is Mashhad City. Ayatollah killed my people. Please help to my people. Please head to Reza Pahlavi. Come to Iran.
I know that sounds like World War III, but mostly it's celebration. I had to look into this too and talk to some of the experts who know what they're actually talking about. It's an amazing, amazing thing. And a big part of that was taking out their security cameras because they were using facial recognition to you would protest before and the Islamist regime would just kill you. I mean, that's what we're dealing with over there, right? And again, I keep going back to this, but compare those brave young people to the idiots falling for the radical leftist ideology over here. No kings. Idiots. Wake up. Well, you're probably not hearing a lot of the Iran story on mainstream media because they're so focused on Minneapolis and they're so focused on their narrative and their agenda, still to this day. But we have a vice president who I think just made his strongest case yet to become president, who just absolutely hammered our traditional corrupt media yesterday. This was amazing. This is pretty long, but if you didn't catch what J.D. Vance said to their faces, and that's key to the story here, to the media yesterday, it was glorious. He's now, barring any unforeseen, ridiculous thing that happens in the country, God forbid, or balloting hijinks or something really bad happens, most likely at this point he's going to be an ex-president. And a post-Trump presidency is going to have to look like this. It just is. And he has to be this guy. But my God, I can't get enough of this.
When I was actually walking out here, somebody sent me a photo of a CNN headline about what happened in Minneapolis. And this is the headline. I'm just going to read it. Outrage after ICE officer kills U.S. citizen in Minneapolis. Well, that's one way to put it, and that is the way that many people in the corporate media have put this attack over the last 24 hours. And I say attack very, very intentionally because this was an attack on federal law enforcement. This was an attack on law and order. This was an attack on the American people. The way that the media, by and large, has reported this story has been an absolute disgrace, and it puts our law enforcement officers at risk every single day. What that headline leaves out is the fact that that very ICE officer nearly had his life ended, dragged by a car 6 months ago, 33 stitches in his leg. So you think maybe he's a little bit sensitive about somebody ramming him with an automobile. What that headline leaves out is that that woman was there to interfere with a legitimate law enforcement operation in the United States of America. What that headline leaves out is that that woman is part of a broader left-wing network to attack, to dox, to assault, and to make it impossible for our ICE officers to do their job. If the
he has to be that guy. He's just going to have to. If and when, and I hope he actually is the next president, he has to stay and be that guy. Because you look at this and you're like, wow, he really hammered the media. They must have learned their lesson, right? Oh, no. Because immediately after said that, you know what the very first question was? The very first question. I don't know what outlet he was from, but a guy goes, so because she's part of a network, she deserved to die? That literally was the question. That presumption built into his question, they're never going to be fixed. It's never going to happen. You're going to have that media that corrupt forever. But again, their power is diminishing because we have information now, because we get a hold of that kind of stuff. And it's not perfect. It's still censored, but we're getting there. You get a hold of information, and people, common sense Americans, always come through, and when we're presented with the right information, the law of the universe is common sense will win eventually. That's why this movement that they're trying to create, all this divide in the country, is not taking off. Interesting, too. You might want to note a couple of things. It's not taking off in these riots. New York, obviously. Of course, that's going to be a mess. Of course, Minneapolis, Seattle, Portland. You know what hasn't been bad? And I hope I don't eat my words over the weekend. I hope nothing radical breaks out. You know what has been not the best, but hasn't had like what we saw in New York last night? Chicago, Illinois. This caught my attention. It's kind of like the expression, the dog that's not barking. Wonder why this hasn't been so crazy in Chicago. That's not really that far from Minneapolis. We know Chicago has a lot of crime. We know that they had a lot of riots and protests recently. I wonder why. Oh, I think I know why. And here's the exact answer and the example of why strong leadership, as opposed to what they have in Minneapolis, matters. They have a police superintendent in Chicago that, how do I put this? Well, he's not going to put up with that bullshit. Here he is.
Federal agents, ICE, HSI, are officers. They are agents of law enforcement. If you box them in with vehicles, it is reasonable for them to believe that they are being ambushed and that this could end in a deadly situation.
Larry Snelling is his name. Now, you can imagine, and we talked about the guts of the young Iranians to stand up against that Islamist regime. You know what else takes guts? A guy like Larry Snelling in Chicago to actually say, we're going to support our officers because they're enforcing the law, and if you box them in, you're probably going to get shot. You know the guts it takes for somebody like that in a city like Chicago? Imagine behind the scenes, the crap he's hearing from the radicals that got elected in that city. So good for Larry Snelling. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Chicago has been, okay, they seem to be holding their own with these riots. They're okay so far. And again, I hope nothing breaks out over the weekend, but it's because you've got a leader in that department. Larry Snelling is the police superintendent who's not going to put up with that and supports his police officers to do the job. That's why. None of this is rocket science. It's all common sense. Speaking of common sense, I'm going to leave you with this. You may be familiar with the name and the legend, Sheriff Grady Judd of Polk County, Florida. Probably because nationally, his clips, his press conferences, he loves the media, does a lot of interviews. He's fantastic. Now, I'm familiar with him because I've been in Florida for quite some time now. I got a pretty good handle on the 67 counties of Florida and how they operate, different areas, what it's not. And a lot of sheriffs in Florida are like this, but none like Grady Judd, because he's just the example of what my point here is we used to be. Now, not just Grady Judd, but when he says things like this, it's how most Americans used to act, and this is what we need to get back to. So Grady Judd had some advice for young, foolish Americans falling into this stupid ideology of obstructing officers doing their jobs and putting their life at risk and jumping in front of cars. He has some advice for you that only Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd can say. Let's go into the weekend with the advice from him.
Let's do this. Let's send out the message loud and clear. And it should start with the mayor, the police chief, the local sheriff, and the governor of Minnesota. Cooperate with law enforcement officers. Don't resist them. Don't violently resist them. If you do violently resist them, if you do felonious assaults with 2-ton weapons, expect to be shot. Hello everyone, Sheriff Grady Judd here. I've been asked by media outlets.
They're going to shoot you. That's just common sense. How in the world did we ever let young people convince themselves that obstructing a law enforcement officer, jumping on his car, blocking traffic, putting their lives, try to grab their gun, won't get you shot? Still mystifies me. So again, it's up to all of us to make sure they don't fall into that stupid radical ideology. But what Sheriff Grady Judd said right there is how most Americans used to feel. It's true. No matter where you live, not just Florida. I grew up in New England. Grew up in Massachusetts. That was pretty much the common sense thing that was going to happen, even in radical left Massachusetts. Trust me on this. Most common sense people would be like, well, you break into my house, I'm going to shoot you, obviously. That's what we need to get back to. Not mass shootings. No, I'm not talking about that. But this common sense mindset that you're going to protect you and yours, of course. So that's Sheriff Grady Judd and his advice. But the takeaway, don't be a panicking. This is not a movement that's taking off. Why? Because we have the information now. And that's the best news of all. So that's good stuff. And again, if I can encourage you, like I was late to the game on, but I'm doing now, watch as many stories and as many clips of this Iran story as you possibly can. It may work out to be one of the biggest story of our lifetime. Honest to God, no hype. It's massively important to support them. A free Iran, can you imagine? All right. So that's the good news. Thanks for hanging out with me. Wicked Radio live stream Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, right here. Your favorite channels, X and on YouTube and on Facebook, audio podcast, wherever you like to get those shortly thereafter. Then as a replay on all this stuff. Put your notifications on. Thank you for the follows. More importantly, have a wicked awesome weekend.